Internet Vikings World of Experts.
I'm the CEO and founder of Internet Vikings. I started working with hosting in 2004 at a shared hosting company, just as a Linux sysadmin, network engineer. And from that, I also managed data center builds, like two of them in Stockholm and Malmö, Sweden. And during that time, I always wanted to start my own company. I did that together with my co-founder, Vikström, in 2008. And our relation to the sports betting and iGaming industry is basically that Victor was working for an iGaming company in Malta during that time. So that's how we more accidentally went into the iGaming and sports betting industry. But it's fun every day because there's always a new challenge, always something new to take on. When I was looking at how we should build this webinar, I was looking at where should we start? And as many things in the US, we need to start on the legal framework and the legislation of sports betting and iGaming and how that have been for the last 60 years. And if we look at that, there is no US in the US real money gaming. That's just the first statement I need to make, because there is every state is treated as its own. And if we look compared to, and every state have their own way of doing it, comparing to, I saw that a lot of people coming from Europe. If you look at the European the European iGaming and sports betting legislation, then it's more one legislation, or there's just a few variants of it. But a lot of countries we've been able to use the Malta, Gibraltar, Albany, Isle of Man license for the last 20 years. So that is the first statement. And due to the reason for this is that you have the Federal Wire Act that was passed in 1961 to combat organized crime, because was sports betting going cross-border, and they created this just to handle that issue. That means that bets needs to be handled in-state and cannot be cross-border between different state lines. And that also means that if we look at every state have their own Department of Gambling Enforcement, they have their own agency that works with this, they are having their own, see how they do legislation in terms of sports betting and iGaming. Take two states like New Jersey and New York. They're so different in terms of legislation for sports betting because of historical reasons. And that is why this is a very tricky setup in terms of infrastructure in the US. One thing that is also super important to mention is that the Wire Act doesn't apply to iGaming. It only applies to sports betting. But because of the legislation tries to be a little bit streamlined, many states have the same kind of requirements for both sports betting and iGaming. As many of the iGaming states, that those operators both do sports betting and iGaming under the same PAM software platform. So that's just the start. And take this with you. Me as a very technical person, it took a few months, a year probably, to understand that this is real. And I'm getting questions like maybe not every week, but every month. Why is this? Why can't we just do like we do in Europe? But this is the case. You just set the tone. That is what we need to look into. And if we look at the US infrastructure on a technical aspect, all states must work independently. All bets needs to be done in-state. There can, of course, be off-state compute to handle specific workloads like BI, like any aggregation. It could be handled for backup. I will come back to that later. But we have a few customers that do very lightweight setup in-state, and then they do other things like in other places of the world where it's more efficient to do some workloads. And then, of course, architecture is important. How you build your platform. And coming back to disaster recovery, I will talk more about that later, because disaster recovery now, when the market is growing, is super interesting to see where that is going. Also, another thing that we need to talk about is a global chip shortage. We still see like 4 to 6 months delivery times of servers. Looking at the server system, that is where we have the most difficulties. Getting components isn't as difficult, but getting complete like VMware compute, it isn't difficult, but that's what we do. But still, it is something that we battle on a weekly basis. Also, North America have a longer delivery time compared to Europe as of now, this like in August, but that shifts like up and down on a not daily basis, but on a monthly basis at least. I will just run through a few things. This is questions that we're getting like I said, we're getting them so often. And also, why is the prices so high? Why do we need to charge so much for certain things? It's not that we want to. It's not that we like have a better margin. It's just because the prices and the different players in the market, especially bandwidth, it could differ like 50 to 100x comparing like Amsterdam to a state in in the US. So it's very, very different how and which cities, which states, how it's looking. And also price inflation. We have had the last week, one data center just increased all the prices with 25%. We had one other state increasing with 10%. Like this is, and we're starting to see that more and more, both in the EU and in the US. And that would be an issue because everyone would need to like absorb and handle those costs. So yes, the prices are high, but I wouldn't call it expensive. It's two different things.
Sorry, Rickard, to interrupt. And what is the price increase related to? Do you have any information about that?
Oh, sorry, can you say it again?
What is the price increase related to? What events? Is there anything in particular?
The inflation, the price inflation, the overall global price inflation. And then looking into, I would go more into the in-state cloud. That's what we are trying to work with to our customers to provide them with a more cloud-like setup than just having colo, than just having dedicated servers. Because if you look at on the global market, most people buy compute, buy some sort of hosting on a cloud way. It's not that you buy the servers today. Like usually there's a board decision, there's a management decision. Like we should not own hardware from many of our customers. So that's why we try to work with them so that they don't need to work and have their own system, have their own systems and their own people to manage it. We also try, of course, to do multi-tenant cloud. We work with the regulators in every state that we can. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Nevada is where multi-tenant cloud is allowed. On all other states, we work with single-tenant cloud. And of course, the vendor needs to have a proper license or registration. And we'll see. Like Pennsylvania just allowed it a few months ago. Like Nevada was also a few months ago. So it's really coming to become that you can buy cloud compute, but it still, again, needs to be in-state.
Perfect. Rickard, while we were on the subject, I've seen, while I was looking through your presentation, that the next topic is dedicated to the big hosting players in the United States market. I've received a question from Tobias Kochler in advance. Can I use the usual major providers like Google, for instance, for my in-state hosting? So what would be the answer, Rickard?
It's also a question that we're getting a lot. And I really wanted to go into that one because it's something that we need to talk about and how we as a hosting provider and also a customer can work with AWS, with Google, and with Azure. Like the hyperscale, they don't have licenses or data centers in every state. That is their issue, and that's what we are helping with because for them, they are hyperscalers. They need massive data centers. We are trying to build that on a state-by-state basis that handles the iGaming regulatory framework. also the contracting party where you buy the hosting from, for example, in Pennsylvania, needs to be licensed. So you need to have a license, and there's currently just 2 providers for it that does that on a national scale that also do Pennsylvania. So that is one of the most important things. But of course, we work with AWS, with Google for their AWS Outpost product. And Google have just launched, I saw the press release a few months ago, the Distributed Cloud Edge, I think they call it. They call it like that. Will also be, so you have dedicated hardware in state in your data center to use your own AWS or GCP native applications or software. There's also, we've had some customers looking at Google Anthos and AWS Anywhere, the ELK Anywhere as an example. Super interesting platforms. It's basically their own stack running on a VMware cluster to do scaling. So yes, you can do Outpost. It is, you need to buy the hardware, you need to set it up. It is not tricky, but it's a lot of things you need to do.
So basically, to sum up, it's a lot of hard work for yourself.
But it's like, it's all depending how your setup looks like on a global scale. There's not one solution for everyone. That's the thing with any technical solution. There's not one solution that fits everyone. We need to find, like, some customers do Outpost, some do distributed cloud edge, some do co-location. There's a huge variation between those ways of doing compute power. I saw that we had one question regarding single and multi-tenant. I think we can just jump back to that. So single tenant cloud, it's where the physical server only caters to one customer, to one licensed customer. Where the multi-tenant cloud, where that you have the hardware caters to multiple customers, multiple instances in, for example, VMware vCloud or vSphere.
Yep, the question came from Dean Hendricks. Thank you very much for your question. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just going forward here, so we have time for more questions. Looking at the backup and redundancy legislation, this is also something we're getting questions every week about this, because there's different in every state. There's not one way to do it. Because the legislation is different, and then also there's a variation of technical solutions for it. The redundant or secondary servers needs to be in state, because they need to be able to accept bets if the main data center goes down. And if we look at the backup directives, they're different in each and every state. There's not one that covers all states in the US. And if we look at, for example, New Jersey and Pennsylvania, you should have it on-site, you can have it off-site. You need to have it off-site as well, but if you have it off-site, it needs to be within either Pennsylvania for the Pennsylvania market, or in New Jersey. It can be outside of Atlantic City, but it needs to be in New Jersey. So we have the options, for example, for our customers to do either Northern Jersey, or we can do Atlantic City backup, depending a little bit what the customer is looking for. And I can talk a little bit more about the recovery and redundancy. Like, it is an increased importance. Like we saw in Europe 10, 15 years ago, when the market is growing, especially as it's a state-by-state market, when every state is growing the number of GGR, then the backup and any physical issues needs to be handled. Looking at Google having a huge issue yesterday, or was on Monday, in their Iowa data center that more or less brought the Google search engine down. There's always issues like that. There was an electrical issue in that data center. There's always problems like that will happen. So looking at the disaster recovery and redundancy, it's something that we are starting to see more and more, because when there's more money going in, it's getting more and more important. So, and we also look at, okay, should it be always on or just disaster recovery? And that's usually up to the customer to decide how much downtime they can handle on a commercial level, and it's more a business decision. And looking at backup solutions, on-site backup, usually every customer has some sort of on-site backup. The reason for that is, for example, in some states, to transport like backups from the main site to a secondary site, it's costly. And especially if we want to do some sort of testing of recovery testing or anything, it's super costly. Therefore, we try to do on-site backup, and then you do a secondary backup off-site. Compared to Europe, bandwidth is super cheap in Europe. In Europe, you wouldn't care; you would just put it either we do Stockholm, Amsterdam, because the cost of transporting data between Stockholm and Amsterdam is more or less nothing. But if you do Atlantic City to Northern Jersey, price is a factor that we need to take into account.
Hi, Rickard. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
There's Kamal Singh. He has a question. I wanted to leave it for the end of the webinar for the Q&A section, but he repeated it. So let's answer it. He had two questions. One is, Kamal, what exactly do you mean? Does the iGaming need to be part of states similar to iBetting? Do you mean as if iGaming part of betting? And the second question will be directly...
Exactly. So I can answer that. No, the Wire Act doesn't apply to iGaming. So it doesn't, on a federal level, need to be part on a state-by-state basis. For example, Connecticut, when they put on the lottery legislation a few months ago, I know there are some operators that does that out of New Jersey because it's just easier. But if we look at other states that have the same kind of legislation, both for sports betting and iGaming, because it's just easier, then they do it having both iGaming and sports betting in that state. So it's more, it's not a federal, if iGaming is not federal, then it's on a state-by-state basis.
Okay, perfect. And there was another question, single cloud. Does it mean asking cloud providers such as Google, AWS to use the hardware that is dedicated to one client for running the cloud services?
It means, for example, the AWS Outpost product and Google Distributed Cloud Edge, again, I think it's called, to run on a prem. It's basically an on-prem version of AWS.
And one more question for Kamal. Thank you for being so active during our webinar. What is means of in-state cloud? Is it like a AWS Outpost?
It could be an AWS Outpost. It could also be like a VMware setup, like we are working with. It could be any other. Like cloud is more a way to make it so that a customer doesn't need to work with the physical servers, doesn't need to care about that. The redundancy is built in. That is what cloud infrastructure is on a technical level. And that's what we're trying to provide. Either Outpost or VMware vCenter setup.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rickard. There's another question from Russell Miller, but he said it's a question for later, so we're going to answer them during our Q&A section. I'm keeping them safe, and please continue.
Thank you. Thank you. I also wanted to put this in, just as a small extra thing. The Massachusetts, they legalized sports betting. They put it in last week. And the bill is still awaiting signing from the governor. And we don't know anything about server requirements, how the framework will look like. But our guess that it's like Pennsylvania, like Colorado, that every provider needs some sort of license or registration, and then it needs to be in state. The backup needs to be done in a certain way, and so on and so forth. But it's super interesting. Like every quarter, there's something new happening. There's new states, either for sports betting, either for iGaming. There's rumors at every conference about new states that will open up, will not open up, that will postpone something, and so on and so forth. So super interesting to see, especially Massachusetts being an interesting state financially. That was all I have on the presentation side.
Yes, that is perfect. Thank you very much, Rickard. I actually had a few advanced questions sent to us dedicated to states particularly. So I had one question by Joshua Mitchell regarding the state of New York. What are the requirements for hosting in the state of New York?
It needs to be an on-prem in-casino hosting in upstate New York. That is what we know. We're looking into more like how we can expand into the New York sports betting scene.
Thank you. And there was another one regarding the state of Michigan. It was asked by Anna Evans. Nice to see ladies in a very male-dominant community. Are your data centers in Michigan far enough so they can use them both and be sure that if there is flooding or any other unexpected external events?
It's 17 miles or 28 kilometers between the two data centers we have in Michigan. It's an interesting question, but also like with more like fires, tornadoes, anything, this will be, I think, more on a board, on a management, on a C-level agenda to have physical redundancy. That's not just physical in the same data center, but literally a few kilometers or tens of kilometers away from each other.
Thank you very much, Rickard. And I can see a live question from Daniel Bloomster, who has also sent us a advanced question via Click Meeting registration. So now here he is asking, what are the hosting requirements for iGaming and sports betting affiliates?
There is none. Like there is no legislation for sports betting and iGaming affiliates, which is, in my opinion, super interesting because then you don't need to do in-state hosting, which is pretty nice to be an affiliate.
That is very nice, Daniel. And yes, there's another question that you've sent during your registration process. That would be, would it be possible to somehow be a sub-affiliate and send traffic via a middleman instead of acquiring affiliates license for each and every US state it requires?
It's a super interesting one, and we looked. I was looking into it like for the last few days, and yes, for some states, it is possible. I can't mention exactly who because I don't know exactly what states, but I know that the affiliation cloud from Raketech is something that you can talk to the affiliate company Raketech. Talk to them to see if you can work with them in any way, if that is something.
Yes, thanks a lot. Thank you, Rickard, and thank you, Daniel, for your question. And I've also seen a question from Russell. Yes, Russell Meller. You've sent one during your registration process and you've dropped one during our webinar. So the question from Russell Meller is, what do you see as the biggest challenge with using cloud technology in an industry that likes to put things in a data center casino?
That's a very good one. No, but I don't think there is like the trend. How we see the hosting industry is going more towards, like from a technical level at least, going more towards not owning physical servers. That AWS started that transition 15 years ago, or more than 15 years ago. They are doing almost 100 billion a year in revenue just by doing that. So I think that that's where the industry is going, and something people are used to buying cloud compute. But of course, there is other companies that like it could be, and it is for some more cost efficient to do co-location, to put, like you said, things in a casino and work with that. But it's, like I said, there's no solution that fits all. It's all depending on like how we want to do it.
Perfect. Thank you, Rickard. And there's another question by Russell Meller asked during the webinar is, what are your thoughts on unified logging and monitoring considerations?
I guess then it means on a state-by-state basis. That is also a little bit depending on what the legislation in that state requires, because some you need to have the log in the state because the regulator should be able to go there, or there should be some way for them to connect into your application to retrieve information. But we're also looking at other customers that have that in state, but then they do all the crunching or the workload on that. For example, for login, then they push that into cloud, into other more cost-efficient compute.
Perfect. Thank you. And there's another question. Wow, there's a whole lineup of questions for you, Rickard, today. I think there's the most active Q&A session we've had so far. People are curious indeed. There's a question from Andrei Siomlea. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Please pardon me if I didn't. What would be the legal framework for a B2B aggregator and back office platform? Is it a B2B license similar to MGA or a specific certification for the technology?
I guess this B2B aggregator is working on the iGaming industry. That would be my guess, at least. If you look at for the 4 interesting iGaming states, Michigan, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, they have that iGaming needs to be in state. And that you need to have an iGaming license to provide aggregation, RGS, to the audience of that state. So it even that the Wire Act doesn't apply, the state level licensing applies as well, because the operator can't buy your games from your RGS if you're not licensed. So it needs to be from the B2C to the B2B provider to the data, to us as a hosting provider, to the data center, the owner of the physical premises. Everyone needs to be either licensed or registered.
Actually, there's another question from Emmanuel Mikhail Faruja directed to you, Rickard, about the Internet Vikings services, I believe. If required, do you offer an active cluster environments in the same state apart from backups?
Yes. That's why we, for example, have 2 data centers in Michigan and also New Jersey. And then we have fibers between them. So yeah, we do it, but it's always with active. It's tricky, and it's good to have some sort of do that either with. It was something with Cloudflare. Okay, how can you aggregate the traffic, and who should be if it's always on, who will get the traffic? What happens if that connection between the data centers break? There's a billion different things around it, but yes, of course, we support it.
Perfect, thank you. And there's a question from Nigel Renouf. Are there any restrictions on using content delivery networks, CDNs, within the United States, or do the CDN providers need to be licensed in the US?
As far as I know, they don't need to be licensed in the US. The reason for that is they are considered more on a ISP, a transit provider, than someone that's providing where usually rough super aggregated. The one that needs to be licensed is where the bet happens and everyone around that bet, or where the RGS is and around, because so no one can go in and fix with do anything with the RGS. So there's the player is losing money because of it. That is the reason. And looking at a CDN, they can't do those kind of things.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And the next question from Mili Juarez. What is the backup legislation in Pennsylvania? Is it much different from the one in New Jersey?
It's actually the same as New Jersey. You can do, I actually just double check that. Primary has to be in PA. Secondary backup also needs to be in PA, in a different facility than the primary backup. And the backup of the backup, the third backup, can be out of state.
Thank you. And the next question by Elliot. Can we have disaster recovery outside the state where we are running our production?
No. Not by knowing every legislation, but I would doubt it. Like I haven't seen anything where you can actually do that.
So it's safe to say for all the main states so far, you need to have it within the state, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Elliot, I hope that answers your question. And the next one is from Dara Connolly. Hi, Rickard. Would you suggest having both on-site and off-site backups?
Yes, because of the expensive bandwidth. Like I said, in Europe, I would do only offsite. But if you look at where it's costly to move 50 or 40 terabytes of data, it's a more cost-efficient solution to do on-site and then that do incremental backup to the off-site backup.
The next question by Josh. I think I have prematurely jumped to your question already regarding the requirements for hosting in the state of New York. Rickard, do you have anything to add, or you've covered everything? Josh has your answer.
No, like I said, it needs to be in a casino in New York. That is the short answer to it.
And the next one is from Nirai K. Please elaborate out-of-state computing. Can we stream transactions to managed Kafka service hosted outside state cloud?
You should be able to do that as long as you do the bet, you do everything in the state. But if you just want to stream transactions for something that's not like where the bet engine happens, then you can do it. Let's say for BI or anything like that. But I've seen some states that you are required to also do BI and reporting in state. But I think you can do it in most states.
There's another question from Russell Meller regarding the multi-vendor infrastructure purchasing decisions. Nothing that companies like yourself are only in a few states. Relative to the number of regulated states, what considerations can you give to the audience for multi-vendor infrastructure purchasing decisions?
We do it. Like there is us and our good friends at Continent 8 that works with this, and they're doing an amazing job. And like it's good to have two different suppliers that can compete, that can create both fiscal redundancy, because I think that is a very important thing going forward. So yes, if I would be a buyer at someone buying hosting in the US, I would use both vendors, of course.
So since we're talking about the number of states where you are active, Rickard, in what states Internet Vikings are currently active?
That I don't know top of my head, because it's like 15 of them.
So the list is not that short.
It's not a short list. And I think there's like 22, 23 in total. Like we are active in 15. And the reason why we're active in, like we have skipped a few, it's more on a commercial decision that we haven't, like our customers haven't seen the commercial value of being in those states, because there is not enough transactions usually. Either to having disaster recovery, to have multiple vendors, there could be different reasons for it.
Are there any new states in the pipeline for the near future?
Yeah, we have Massachusetts. Like I said, Nevada is one. We set up a data center just a few weeks ago. We have applied for the Nevada cloud provider, IT service cloud provider license, I think it's called. Super interesting. We will be the first nationwide hosting provider will get that license. So yeah, it's more and more states as the sports betting and iGaming it's opening up.
Okay, perfect, Rickard. I will ask the last two questions because we're running out of time. So guys, if you have more questions, we're going to answer those that are currently in the chat. If you have more questions, please feel free to send it to our direct email or here in the chat, and we're going to answer them by email after the webinar. So that is not an issue if you have unanswered questions. But so far, there is one more from Emmanuel Mikhail Faruja. As regards to COC, NOC, is this an integrated service which can be included in the hosting with Internet Vikings? This is primarily regarding monitoring and failure escalation.
Short answer is no. And the reason for it is that we haven't had that kind of like having a SOC. It's a completely different thing to provide a SOC service. Same thing with being a NOC. It's integrate those processes with the customer. It's a very different setup than provide hosting, compute power, than being integrated into every customer's systems, because it's and we try to stay away from that. The customer work with their infrastructure, they work with their platform. We handle the infrastructure behind it or underneath it, just to have some sort of divider who does what.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And the last question for today, that would be from Maximilian Hofer. Hi, Rickard. Can we host partially in the US and partially outside of the US on our regular servers?
Yes. There's a lot of people doing that. So the short answer is yes, but it all comes back to how you architect your application. It's so yes, you can probably do that.
There is a small thank you message from Don Kniesel. Thank you. Very good presentation with great interaction. Have a nice day. Thank you very much for your feedback, Don, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Rickard.
Thank you.
Visit our website, internetvikings.com.